He had lived with his parents for some time. He pretty much had always lived with his parents aside from when he was in the army. And I think he had been married for like 5 years, and had been separated from his ex-wife for like, she wasn't even his, I think he was still technically married, but he had been separated from her for like 5 years. And he was always hoping that she would come back. Um, and uh, I'm pretty sure that he hadn't really lived. I think that they even lived with his parents, or at least for a time lived with his parents. So he really spent most of his time living at his parents' house. He had never really been alone. And the only time I'd been alone was when I was married. I had a slight advantage in that way, but we were both coming from a really immature place, and we're both immediately quite codependent with each other. His parents were very kind, um, weirdly accepting of the situation that we were in, and of me being a stranger coming from Wisconsin, planning on going out on the road and then just ending up living with them. We didn't work. He didn't work. I think he started I don't think he even got the job until after I left. Or if he got the job, it was like right before I ended up leaving. So like a year almost. I left 11 months after living with him. So I think it was like maybe 10 months to a year before he got a job. And in part, I think he only got that because I was very insistent upon working. I didn't like not working. I was very, at that point, when at 24, like I'd already worked multiple jobs, multiple times. Like there were, in order to move in with my ex-husband, I had worked 3 jobs at the same time for the course of like, I think 6 to 8 months in order to get enough money in order to move with him. And then I worked 2 jobs most of the time. I was used to working. I was used to providing for myself. It was very weird just living with his parents, not having money. At that point, we started, selling a few things and making art and trying to sell art and trying to do stuff that way to make money. He would like make me gamble with scratch cards in order to try to get money, which never worked. We never made, I think we probably made like $10, after all the money that we ended up spending. And he was always very frustrated with me about that because he said that it was my faith that was keeping us not being able to make money, which is fair, to be honest, but I digress. Most of this dude's theology was delusional. I mean, he was insane, but at the same time, he was an incredibly intelligent, just a little off. So like a lot of the things have proven to be valid, and I've carried those things with me. It was the way he was going about things that was so fucked up more than anything. And some of these concepts are fucking wild, but it was a time. Okay, so the way I talk about it now, when I just happen to mention it, is essentially that I had basically knowingly signed myself up for this dude's delusional psyop. That's 100% what it became. And it became that pretty quickly. It actually started moving in that direction prior to him picking me up. The couple days after he had done acid and the sassafras with that girl, he started talking about these things. He started talking about this game that he had for me, and that this was part of my process, that this was my destiny, essentially, and that he was my handler, he was my guide, that he was going to lead me through it. I don't even know where to begin with the way that things work, because obviously the way that abuse happens usually is like progressively. It doesn't just start out with a dude like being super controlling and aggressive and weird and like all of these sorts of things right off the bat. There's different red flags that you ignore, and then they just get more and more intense, and to the point that you're now in a situation you feel like you can't get out of. So it worked that way. There was so much good that I was receiving out of that relationship because I hadn't been properly cared for prior. So the ways that he was instilling healthy behaviors in me was reflecting positively in me and in my growth in a way that made it very hard to assess the actual trauma I was receiving on top of those things, because there was a genuine benefit that was happening. I'd always struggled with my weight and struggled with my self-esteem. He was teaching me healthy diets and healthy exercise and all of these different things. Well, he was controlling these things. He was insisting upon these things. I was very submissive and very willing to be given to those things, and was seeing the active benefits of it. And being in those places physically was also helping me mentally. So I did not realize how traumatized I was until I got fully out of the situation. Like, I didn't even realize, but I started to act out of from the trauma, maybe like six to eight, probably like 8 months in. Yeah. And I started working, managing another dog daycare there in Baltimore, like 6 months after I had moved in with him. I had pretty much begged over time to be able to work, and had proven that he could trust me to work. He was very controlling about how I spent my time and energy. So he had seen that I'd become depressed and that it was very hard for me to remain active when I was just trapped in the house. So he allowed for me to get the job, but was very insistent upon, like, either he would drop me off, or he had to know like when I was leaving, and insisted that I come back right away, and would call me, throughout the day to make sure I was there and different things like that. And it didn't take long of me working and being around other people for the first time in 6 months, for people to start being like, that doesn't seem like things are right. Like, it seems like maybe there's something off about your life and what's going on. One of my coworkers happened to, in care, share that with my management, and they all had a discussion with me about it. She apologized. She felt so bad about telling my bosses that she was concerned for me, but I was so thankful that she did, and that she was strong enough to do that, because it was a scary situation. And had she not have done that, I wouldn't have gotten out of that situation. Now, I ended up leaving after they had that talk with me and convinced me, like, you're not safe. I knew I wasn't safe. I was expressing that, but I was doing it in the subconscious. I wasn't like aware of what was going on. I was just letting it happen. And they were like, we're scared for you. And when I realized that other people could recognize the things that I had been feeling but being invalidated about, I realized how dangerous the situation truly was. I already did, but I didn't care. Seeing that other people cared, like, woke me up to myself to be like, well, you're right. This is fucked up, and you're right. I shouldn't be in this situation. But it took a lot. And even that was a whole messed up, crazy time. Oh my God, this experience was so crazy. Maybe I'll make a second video where I can start from beginning to end, kind of a lot of the things that I was experiencing, so that I can get that stuff out, because this is all, leading up to different things. And by the time I actually left, I was when I had a psychotic break. I I left, ended up going immediately back, and then after 2 weeks of even more severe abuse, ended up leaving again. I escaped, rather. Like, it was an escape. He was doing everything in his power to try to keep me. He was actively cursing me, cursing my vehicle, cursing my dog. Things were really messed up, and his family even had gotten involved at that point, and we're like, this isn't right, something's not okay. But they didn't know what was going on, and he had made it seem like it was just me being crazy, and so they were conflicted about that, and it was just a really messed up time. And by the time I left, I went back to my parents because I didn't know what else to do. I was so lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know who I was. And by that I mean, Dude, I was so fucked up. I sat on my parents' futon in the same shirt, the same shorts, the same shirt for like 2 months in a catatonic state. It was at least like a month and a half that I just didn't even talk to them. They were like were under the they were under the impression that I had been doing drugs and that I was withdrawing. So they just like left me alone. Because they just thought I was fucked up. I was fucked up because I was being abused. I was being drugged, but I wasn't actively trying to do drugs. I did mushrooms for the first time while I was there. I robo-tripped for the first time while I was there. I did those things once. And I was smoking pot inconsistently. But I was smoking pot and smoking cigarettes. Actually, I think I had quit cigarettes for a time. But I wasn't like on heroin like they assumed. I wasn't, withdrawing from hard drugs. I was psychologically broken down and warped, like brainwashed. I'd been brainwashed. That's all he did the whole time was brainwashing me. And I made the allowance for it. It was part of my death wish, right? Like I didn't care about myself, didn't care what happened to me. It was like, if you think you can do better with me, you do it. I gave him mind, body, and soul, and he took full advantage. By the time I was sitting on that couch, I had become convinced. I was super delusional. I was so fucked up and out of my mind. I had become convinced, and I'll get into the story of how it'll make more sense, but like that it's crazy because my family ended up just validating it too. I had become convinced that had been murdered and replaced with my own clone, that the guy I lived with, that he had worked for the CIA and was affiliated with the CIA, that he had brought me to where we were in Baltimore on purpose because that was closer to the facilities, which there are CIA facilities there, like in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And he had taken me around that area and stuff like that too. There was just a lot. But I'd been convinced that I had been replaced with my own clone, so that I was essentially like a bioorganic android version of myself, that my consciousness was a just super developed computer system that my real person's DNA and consciousness through my DNA had been downloaded into. I felt like all of my memories were simply downloads. They weren't things I actively experienced. They weren't things. Accessing my own memories felt like flipping through a catalog of codes and just finding the right code for that experience. It's crazy because I've still carried, like, it changed me. I still process things this way. Like my memory, it triggered my capacity for memory. I was so shut off prior to this experience and was so fucked up prior to all of this that like it really did open up my capacity for my mentality. Like believing myself to be some type of essential robot, I found it easier to actively process my experiences and to remember my actual experiences in a non-delusional way, because it was a code. I was detached from it. It was so strange. I was so fucked up. It was crazy, but at the same time, I was also like I'd been opened to an intelligence that I hadn't had prior. Everybody knew me to be pretty, just like la-di-da, like fun-loving and goofy and silly and a little bit crazy and just like unhinged in general, and clumsy and kind of wild, just like not really grounded in any fashion. I came back too grounded, you know. I was a different person, to the point where my family treated me like I was a different person. Um, and that was just validating those concepts. So it took like about 4 months before I was able to start coming back into myself. And even that, at the time, I mean, it took years. It took literal years after that experience for me to start to just be okay, truly. But it took about 4 months before the shock wore off, and I was able to fall into a concept of active identity, because I'd been so far removed from that. And it was in the process of coming out of that that I started to become aware of. My first question to myself was, I remember just waking up, like it was like in the middle of the day or whatever, but like coming to clarity and just being like, what the fuck? What the fuck? Like, what did I do? Like, why did I put myself through that? Why did I put myself through that? Why did that, not even like a victim mentality, like, why me? I was like, why, what is it about me or my life or my experiences that made those allowances? Like, because nobody goes through that. Nobody just does that. Nobody would just experience those things and let themselves experience those things. Like, what is going on? And I started to estrange myself again from my family pretty hardcore at that point, because I felt like I was like, I know that it's something with my family. It's something with my childhood. It's something, there's reasons that was in the place that I was in order to make allowances for that. Why was I so low that I allowed that? Well, I was low prior to those experiences, right? I was so fucked up prior to even going to Baltimore, prior to even meeting that dude. That's why I allowed myself to be with that dude. And I was like, oh, so that's why I was fucked up. It wasn't because of my experience in Baltimore. That actually woke me up. It was everything that happened to me prior and everything that was happening to me to put me in that state. And I started to become extremely skeptical of my family. The first person I was able to pinpoint as a problem, as far as my psychology or my experiences and emotions and stuff had been concerned, was my brother, because he had groomed me my entire life. He sexually assaulted me in a lot of different ways. And, throughout my childhood, as soon as I was 18, he didn't care anymore. But when I was growing up, it was pretty fucked up. And that in of itself became progressive. And there's a lot that I still have blocked out, because it's just not fun to think about and to try to go through. And if I can process healing without thinking about a lot of those details, I'd prefer to. I'm sure the older I get, the more I'll be able to look at those things and be like, okay, I can process this now. But where I'm at now, like, there's only a certain amount of my experiences that I'm willing to even like think about and consider and process. But when I realized that I was like, so many of the reasons that I allowed the behavior, the controlling, abusive behavior that I had experienced was because of the grooming that he had done, the ways that he had been, the ways that he had convinced me that he was my best friend while he was actively disrespecting me constantly. Always. He didn't actually care about me. He didn't actually care about my well-being. He made it appear as if he did. I think he wanted to more than anyone else did, because he recognized that there wasn't anybody else there for me. But he wasn't in a place of being able to actually be there for me either. So he just ended up using me almost worse for that, because I did become closer to him than anyone else. And he was just like everybody else, if not worse, because when we were children, when I was very young, like 3 to 5, I made the active decision to make myself available to his abuse. And because I was willing to not view it as abusive, I was willing to see him as a person that was struggling with his own trauma and was just projecting that onto me. And I felt like in giving him a safe space to project those things, I was protecting others from his projections, and I was giving him space for healing, to be able to process it the way that he was processing it, and then to hopefully come to something better. I didn't realize that I was enabling because we were so young and had a trauma bond. I didn't realize that that was me projecting my own trauma onto him by making those allowances. So that just continued to develop over time, to the point where, like, after I got out of Baltimore, I was like, I wanted to start taking responsibility for those systems in my life and for those experiences in my life. And I realized that, like, the bond that I had with him was so incredibly toxic and had been our entire lives, that I was like, I can't continue this. I have to break this off. But as soon as I broke off my relationship with him, which is strange to me because my parents literally grounded me from having a relationship with him for 2 years when he became famous for his music, because they considered him to be a bad influence. So when I wanted to be closest to him and he was willing to be close to me, they made the choice of grounding me and did not let me have a relationship with him for 2 years. But then when I actively decided on my own that it was unhealthy and that I didn't want a relationship with him, my mom started freaking out and making a problem with the entire family, literally involving everybody, complaining to everybody about it, acting all crazy so that everybody was looking at me to, like, solve the problem. Like, you must be the crazy one because look how crazy you're making your mom. That's how they've all viewed it, because that's how she makes it seem. And she was like, you're breaking apart. She's told me, like, a handful of times that I'm destroying the family, I'm breaking the family, I'm ruining the family by not actively engaging in these toxic dynamics. And I was like, I don't care what you think or how you feel. I don't care. You don't care how I feel. I don't care how you feel. I'm trying to process what the fuck has happened to me and why, and you're trying to keep me from that. So in breaking away from my brother, I quickly became aware that my issue was actually with my mom. I did not know where to begin with that understanding. I was so embittered. I was so hurt. I was so lost. And I was trying my hardest not to project those things, because all I'd become aware of at that point was that the dude I'd been with in Baltimore was projecting all of his shit onto me. And the reason I made an allowance for that was because I had grown comfortable with my brother's projections onto me. The reason I did that was because we both had become comfortable with our mom's projections onto us, but I didn't know that yet or understand that yet. All I knew was that projecting your trauma onto somebody else was not the answer. And I was trying my hardest to keep from that, at the same time being consistently triggered by the fact that, I was becoming aware that these people were in part responsible for the experiences that I had, and the not my responses to it, really. I was brainwashed, actively, intentionally brainwashed most of my life. People did that on purpose. So, like, they do have responsibility for the ways that I was responding to things, because they were training me to respond that way. At the same time, though, now, obviously, as an independent individual who is self-actualized even at all, I am aware that blaming them or trying to continue to give them a sense of responsibility for my responses to things now is only giving them a power they don't deserve. So I don't do that. But I do believe that before I became self-actualized, I very much was entrenched in the brainwashing and in the training, to the point where, like, they do have a role in the reason I was responding to things the way I was. At the same time, it was part of my spirit becoming awakened to itself to the point of self-actualization that was allowing me to start running from those things and start trying to become estranged in the first place. That's why my mom had such an issue with those things and never wanted me to become self-actualized. But there was something in me already, and that had always been in me already. It wasn't a rebellion, but it wasn't a rebellion. It was a sense of freedom of self, but like it did enact as a form of rebellion as I was growing up, because the system that I was enslaved to was, yeah, I was rebellious against that because it was keeping me from myself. It was keeping me from being able to know myself truly and being able to be okay in myself and being able to do things for myself and think for myself and speak for myself and feel for myself and live my own actual life and be who I really truly am. Whew, whew. So shit was wild. Shit was wild. This is about to end and I have to go to the bathroom. I'm going to go upload this. I have to walk to go upload it because it's going to take a while otherwise. It'll probably take a couple hours and then I'll be back and I will talk about the actual experiences I experienced that led into all of that. And then I'll go from there. But this is a lot that I've already gotten out and I'm happy to have gotten it out. So, all right. Thanks for listening and I will see you again shortly.